Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be comparing 4 different video gen platforms and seeing how well they do looking at animation, specifically anime. We're going to be looking at the new popular Google Flow with VEO3. We're going to be comparing how Runway ML does animation. We'll be looking at Midjourney's new animation capability, and then we'll be looking at good old trusty Kling AI. Now we're going to be trying 4 different images with 4 distinct prompts. First off, we're going to have our cyberpunk man here. We're going to want him to take a drink from his glass. The next image we're going to be testing is our samurai man here. We're going to want him to draw his sword. And then our third image is going to be this couple walking down our lovely path here in the park. And then finally, we're going to try a fight scene between our flower samurai old man and our ninja, and we're going to stress test and see if any of these platforms can do a proper anime fight scene yet. Now we're going to be ranking all of these platforms out of 10, 5 points for animation and 5 points for prompt adherence. So Kling is the first platform that we tested. We're using the Kling 2.1 model, and we're doing image to video. We're using a simple prompt. Now if we go in and see how it did, we're going to see that trademark Kling talking. Every character talks in Kling unless you tell them not to. It's incredibly annoying. However, when we think about is it doing what we want it to do, it is. He is taking that drink, but the background, it almost looks like he's on a train or like he's in a floating platform in the sky. But the way that the glass kind of teleports into his hand, I'm not a fan with that. Let's see how it did animation 2. This one was better. It's more of a slower drink. However, once again, the glass kind of floats into his hand and that background is speeding, behind him. It's really not the greatest. I think if I was to give this a grade with Kling, I am going to give it a 7 out of 10 in terms of prompt adherence and a 6 out of 10 in terms of animation. So let's move on to Runway. So we did 2 generations with Runway. So look at this one, guys. This is really, really good. We can see here he's grabbing the glass very smoothly. He's a little quick the way his hand grabs it and one of his fingers disappears. The way the liquid moves in the glass is pretty nice. He's blinking. He's not talking. He's taking a slow sip. I'm very impressed with this. I would say that in terms of prompt adherence, this is a 9 out of 10. And animation quality, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. Now, Midjourney has new new video generation capabilities. You can see that Midjourney, the glass is kind of teleporting into his hand. I'm not really a fan of that. As well as there's like a lot of bubbles in the scene. I didn't necessarily prompt for that. However, the man himself looks pretty good. He's really tipping that glass back. We can even see like the liquid disappearing from the glass as it kind of goes into his mouth. Like, that's pretty cool. I'm going to give this, in terms of Midjourney, I'm going to give this, in terms of prompt adherence, we're going to give it an 8 out of 10. And in terms of animation, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's on par with Kling. Now, VEO in particular doesn't have image to video. This is a major thing that this platform is lacking. I would argue that it's unusable for any type of like enterprise project until that feature's there. It says it's coming. If you switch to frames to video and try VEO3, it will actually let you do it, but then it'll switch you to another model. So it's on the way. It's going to come. Let's see how it handled. You can see the prompt here that we used for this particular one. I tried to recreate it as best I could from the image, and let's see how it did. So we can see here, it grabbed the glass. It looks really nice the way the liquid is going in. Obviously it doesn't align with like our vision, but you can't really hate on the animation quality. So in terms of like animation quality, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. For what it is doing, it's doing it very well. And in terms of prompt quality, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. So let's move on to our second scene here. In our second scene, we now have our samurai man, and we're going to want him to draw his sword. So Kling, he kind of pulls out his sword. He does a good animation like he's going to draw it, but then when the sword comes out, it's like a double-sided Darth Maul type lightsaber that would have cut his hand open trying to do that. His wind and hair, like they're blowing in the wind, and that looks nice. However, I'm not really impressed. These models still struggle with image to video when you're introducing elements that aren't present in the image. So in terms of prompt adherence, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. And in terms of animation, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. Now, Runway, when we look at this particular example, let's see how it did. The man is talking, and he starts... He pulls a cross out. So this is, I think, the first spike up in difficulty is we're starting to introduce elements that aren't in the frame. You can see here, Runway really started to fall apart. It did so well with that first scene, and this one I would say is even worse than Kling. He does some random stuff. The prompt was exactly the same. I'm going to give this prompt adherence a 2 out of 10. It is not that great, and we're going to give the animation quality a 4 out of 10. Like, the hair looks good and like he looks good. However, what he's doing is not what we asked for and doesn't really make any sense either. So in a couple of the examples from Midjourney, the sword kind of teleports out. You all know what we're looking for, right? Like, everyone's seen an anime sword draw. I had the same test in my last video. We want it to slide out of the sheath nice and smooth. It's just not happening. Let's see how a couple of these generations did. Yeah, so that one, that's not really looking too good. None of them on Midjourney really, yeah, so there's like a cloth on that one. That one's pretty interesting. None of these really did what we wanted. For Midjourney, in terms of animation, I'm going to give this a similar score to Runway. In terms of prompt adherence, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. And in terms of animation quality, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. On VEO, once again, I had to prompt. I'm going to let this play in full, and then we'll talk through it. So with VEO, once again, we have to do text to video. I think we got a closer sort of example to what we were looking for from some of our other examples. However, it's not exactly what we wanted. He did draw his sword. Like, you can see here, the sword is out of its sheath. So we're going to give a VEO, the hair's blowing in the wind and everything. I'm going to give VEO a 6 out of 10 here for prompt adherence and another 6 out of 10 in terms of animation. So VEO kind of wins this one. Now our third test is going to be this couple walking along the park. And this is another jump up in difficulty because now we're introducing multiple characters into the scene. Let's go ahead and move into Kling here and see how it did with this particular animation. So Kling did a pretty good job. Both the characters are walking. The camera is holding steady as we kind of move throughout the park. I'm going to give this, in terms of animation, a 8 out of 10. And prompt quality, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. This is pretty much exactly what I looked for, and I love the way how the background looks. Let's see how Runway did. Now Runway, they're walking pretty slowly, and they kind of have uniform steps. There's not as much life in them as there was in the Kling example. And I use the exact same prompt. She's not looking at him. They're not, kind of moving around. You could for sure use this. However, it's not as good as Kling. So I think for Runway in this example, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10 in terms of prompt adherence and a 5 out of 10 in terms of animation quality. I think this is pretty lackluster compared to what Kling did. For Midjourney in this example, we got a couple. In this example, they are power walking down that path. So I am actually not, that's not the greatest. It's not that good. Let's see how some of the others did. This one looks a little bit more natural, but you can see here, if I make this bigger, there's a tree just kind of hovering there. That, that's not supposed to look like that. The camera is supposed to follow them. This one got the trees pretty good. You can see here it's extending the scene very neatly from what we had. And, I would say that's probably on par with Runway, if maybe not a little better. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10 in terms of prompt adherence and a 6 out of 10 in terms of animation quality. Now, VEO's example with this, I'm going to go ahead and show this in its entirety, and we'll watch it with sound, and then we'll talk through it.
I've been thinking about what you said earlier.
I didn't prompt for that dialogue. It kind of introduced that into the scene. However, you could imagine the degree of creative control you're going to have with this platform, introducing dialogue that you write into your text prompts in this. Like, the animation looks great. The scene's consistent. Even the way it kind of, like, you can imagine that the image that I had with some of the other ones, there was more of a side profile. I tried to prompt for that here. However, I would almost argue that it gave me a better looking shot with VEO coming up with like how the shot should look based upon my text prompt. Sees how they start more in the left in frame and come into center here with what's going on in the background. For VEO, guys, I'm going to give this one, in terms of prompt adherence, a 8 out of 10. And in terms of animation and overall quality, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 as well. So let's talk about our fight scene. We're squaring off, and we're going to see if we can do a fight scene here. Let's see how it did with Kling. So I think whatever model, how they trained fight scenes with Kling, they do a same. I've noticed this with a lot of the same the choreography, to where they kind of come together and dance there and push back and forth. It's not great. In terms of prompt quality, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10, and in animation quality, we're going to give this a 2 out of 10. It's not good. Let's see how Runway did. So with Runway, they're kind of just pushing the swords against each other. Once again, not really great. There's less morphing than there was with Kling, but you know, this isn't something that you could use. In terms of Runway, I'm going to give this the same score as Kling, a 4 out of 10 in terms of prompt adherence, and a 2 out of 10 in terms of animation. Not great. Let's see how Midjourney did. Midjourney introduces, I would say this looks better from an animation perspective than the first two. There's less warping. There's still a bunch of crazy nonsense going on, but there's not any like character warping. There's not like a lot of too much blurring. Like, look at that. That's not too bad. There's introducing like some kind of swords, but you could use that scene then cut away. So that's actually pretty good. For Midjourney here, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10 in terms of prompt adherence, and a 4 out of 10 in terms of I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 in terms of animation. I think that it's still kept it 2D and clean, to whereas you looked at some of these examples from Kling and look at all that warping and blurriness. It just doesn't look good at all. Now VEO, let's see how VEO did. You know, you kind of had to do text to video. Let's go ahead and watch this in its entirety, and then we'll see how it did. Alright, so this sort of looks like a mobile like gotcha game or something like that. It's like I'm on auto battle right now. I'm gonna see how well my character's doing. You know, not the greatest. When you went for a fight, you kind of want more of like dynamic sequencing and everything. However, you know, it's getting there. I don't think that any of these platforms can really just take fight scene and do it justice right now, but I think we'll be there in like a year. So for VEO, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10 in terms of prompt adherence, and a 2 out of 10 in terms of animation. I do like that it's introducing these other elements into the scene. So everyone, in total, here is where we landed with all of our various different scores. I would say that the surprise horse was Runway and Midjourney. I think that those two platforms did very well, and those platforms also have unlimited plans for around the $60 to $100 mark a month. Kling, while still impressive on some of these shots, disappointed me a little bit. I found that it really wasn't the greatest. However, I think it definitely still has a place. And I think VEO is really the platform that we watch as we move into the future, because we're going to see some real cool stuff come from here. With that said, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned, more videos to come. Please like and subscribe. I'm really trying to grow the channel, so a sub would mean a lot to me if you got value from this video. But with that said, everyone, hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'll see you all on the next one. Peace.